Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by the man who holds a butcher knife over you while you sleep. It's the one, the only, Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Can I kill him, Scott? Can I?
Yeah, of course.
Nice.
Why would I say no to that?
Awesome.
Every child must learn at some point to stand over someone with a butcher knife until they kill them, right? That's part of growing up.
Scott, did I ever tell you that my son sleepwalks? Like legit.
Does he have access to sharp knives? Because you should probably check on that.
I mean, it's a good point. It's a good question. Let me deal with that. Hold on.
This week on the podcast, Book 2 of The Stand begins as we discuss chapters 43 and 44. It's a week of meetings as Nick runs across Tom Cullen, Lau is yes, and Larry runs into Joe and Nadine, and everyone starts heading to some random cornfield in Nebraska. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
So as you said, we begin Book 2, and there is I think a pretty pronounced shift in terms of the way the story feels. I feel like the sorts of things we're doing with the story, you know, we've ended the beginning of the beginning, and now we're in the middle of the middle. I don't know. It's a very I feel like I have less idea of what exactly we're doing and where exactly we're going, and I think that is because we have sort of ended arc 1, we've begun arc 2, and it's there's some more table setting happening actually as we introduce some of these new characters, for example.
Yeah, no, that's a great pull. I think you're absolutely right that we're kind of in this weird place where I think the first part of the book, it's very clear what's happening, right? Like the flu is spreading, everyone's dying, and we're slowly eliminating people until we've got only our characters left. And then there's very much the sense of, okay, what now going on right now? And these two chapters specifically kind of start to build the frame of what the what now will be. And I'm curious how the longer chapters format kind of worked for you here, because it does feel like we've almost like with the start of book 2, not entirely, but kind of changed the format of the book a little bit. Up until this point, there were many chapters in this book, and the chapters were relatively short. And now here and next week and the week after, we're only covering 2 chapters a week because each chapter is 40 pages plus on their own. And so you're staying with our characters for a lot longer, to the point where actually at the very end of this reading, we realize that while we've been with Larry for 40 plus chapters, our other characters have been doing stuff, right? Because we come across a sign that shows that Stu and Franny and Harold have rejoined with Glenn and are on their way to Nebraska.
Yeah, that was kind of funny, actually. So yeah, to answer your question, I did feel like there was a shift in the feeling, the tone, the kind of story that it is with these longer chapters. You know, we kind of lost a bit of our propulsiveness. We had this, you know, rapid kind of driving storytelling. You know, you had this feeling of the story pushing from moment to moment, and there was you know, there's a sense of danger and anxiety, and it really kind of emotionally changed into. Yeah, I'd say the overriding emotional theme throughout this bit was sort of loneliness and like the incredible gladness that comes when that loneliness is relieved. Also, just the very, very long chapter where Larry is just sort of trekking. I'm sure you already know what I'm going to say. Is it kind of reminded me of some parts of Lord of the Rings where you have just travel. It's travel across a landscape, and very little of what you could call plot is actually happening. A lot of character stuff is happening. There's a lot of internal stuff happening. And it's, of course, it's just as fun to read as anything else, but the actual sort of rate of stuff happening slows down quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think that made it interesting for kind of planning this week's episode as well, because I feel like our episodes the last few weeks have been absolutely stuffed, and it's not because we were covering any more chapters. It's just when the chapters are smaller, there's all these event after event after event, where these 2 chapters, you know, it's not that stuff doesn't happen, but it is, as you said, kind of more drawn out, slower paced, and I think it's going to allow us to cover it in maybe a little bit more detail when we have these longer chapters. So I think there's good and bad of this change of style and tone and pace, I think.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, let's get into it. But before we do that, we do have a couple of quick announcements. Here's the one that you've been hearing all month long. Our Do the King Thing short fiction writing contest is coming to a close very quickly. If you're listening to this on the 25th of August, as in the day this episode comes out, you have less than 24 hours to get your story in. Submissions will close. I believe it's midnight on... It's this Thursday at midnight, so technically Friday, right? Technically Friday midnight Pacific time, I think is what we said.
Yeah, whatever it says in the document, I can't remember.
I'm pretty sure it's Friday. It's Thursday. It's end of day Thursday Pacific time, basically 11:59 on the 25th of August. We have to put a deadline in there somewhere. These aren't like super hard, fast rules, but get your stories in because we are going to have to close it off not long after midnight on the 25th. Yeah. So there's still plenty of time to write your story and get it in.
There is, yeah. Just a reminder, it's a fairly short story that you're being asked to write, and you can write it pretty quickly. Shouldn't take more than an hour to write a first draft if you're just kind of going,
Yeah.
If you have the idea, that is.
Yeah, definitely. So get those in, and can't wait to read them. As I said, I've already been reading the ones that we've gotten already, Matt, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. And if you're a patron, you should hopefully, I'm going to say this now to hold myself to it, but hopefully we will have all those stories and the voting process ready sometime next week. So maybe before you've heard us again next week, you will have started voting on short stories. I don't know if we can hold ourselves to that, Matt, but we're gonna certainly try.
Yep. That's Scott very carefully didn't promise anything right there.
That's politics.
And I'm glad, because we'll see what happens, folks.
That's politics. I think one more quick announcement. We have a book club coming up this Friday. For those that don't know, maybe you're new to this particular podcast. Every month, Matt and I do a online book club on our YouTube channel. Just go over to search Doof Media on YouTube, and we meet for a couple of hours on Friday night, the last Friday of the month, to talk about a book for those 2 hours. This month, we are talking about what book, Matt?
Talking about the Hail Mary Project by Andy Weir, who is the guy who wrote the novel The Martian, about which the Matt Damon film was made. And I really enjoyed the Hail Mary Project quite a lot, and I know we're going to have a lot of fun talking about it. So. Yeah,
we definitely are. So if you have read the book or want to read the book before Friday and want to come hang out for a couple of hours with us on YouTube, check it out. Again, I just go to YouTube and search Doof Media. I don't think we've changed our YouTube to like the big long string of numbers they give you originally, to just be like youtube.com/Doof Media. I don't think we've done that yet. I tried to do it once and it didn't work, but just search just Google Doof Media YouTube, and you'll find it, and subscribe, and make sure you come on Friday night to hang out with us.
Yeah. And I read that book in a couple days. It's a short read. So.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's get into it, Matt. As we said at the beginning of the show, this week we begin book 2 of The Stand. This book is titled On the Border. Any guesses as to what that could possibly be referring to, Matt?
Well, I don't know. On the Border, I think that it's one of those, Wild Bow-esque titles where it means lots of different things. It means, on the border between... the beginning part of the story where everything was falling apart, and this part of the story where maybe people are trying to put things back together. We have different characters who are on the border of character change and growth, you could say. I don't know exactly. I feel like there are other things that it's gesturing at that we aren't privy to yet, actually.
Yeah, of course, you missed the most important one, being the Tex-Mex chain of restaurants. On the border.
I did miss that one. Yeah. Oh.
Big, large chips, very large chips there.
Yeah, God, I'm so hungry.
All right. As always, we have a new book, a new section, a new part of the book, which means we have new quotes, Matt. Once again, we have 2 song lyrics here. The first one is from a Paul Simon song called American Tune. I'm not going to read the lyrics for you here, but I just want to talk about the song choice, because this Paul Simon song is it's a sad one, Matt. It's a real sad song. It's about highlighting the American experience of wariness, of sadness, of broken dreams, of things not accomplished, of kind of the drudgery and toll of everyday American life, as contrasted with the belief in what the American dream can be. This particular line that King has quoted here captures the idea of travel, of struggle, but ultimately with the desire to rebuild something American, possibly. We'll see.
Yeah, I think that's a great opening quote. Obviously King puts a lot of thought into these. Here, I think this is really speaking to the ways in which King's feelings toward America are complicated and ambiguous, because you can't have this sense of America as a place of disappointment if it wasn't a place of profound promise in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of the dichotomy that is going to be harped upon throughout these chapters, actually.
Yeah, I think dichotomy is the word of the day for sure. Because I mean, the other quote here, we move from this incredibly depressing, sad Paul Simon song to Chuck Berry singing Back in the USA, which is an unapologetic love letter to America, right? It is a song of the story of the song is a man is returning to the US from traveling abroad, and he is so happy to be home, and he just wants to go around doing American stuff. Like the quote in the lyrics here is, looking hard for a drive-in, searching for a parking space where hamburgers sizzle on an open grill, jukebox is jumping with records. Like, this is unapologetically, stereotypical America. And so we have this really great dichotomy of the Paul Simon sad song about like a dream unfulfilled, a wariness, a toil, a hopelessness that is being an American. And then you have the Chuck Berry song about, relentless positivity, pro-America, fuck yeah. And it is, of course, America is both these things. And I think the struggle between these parts is a lot of what the book is doing, at least this week.
Yeah, like you said, dichotomies all over the place. I mean, the spirit of America is both to build amazing things and to blow shit up.
That is very true.
And I think we're going to see both aspects of humanity, but also particularly Americanness.
Yeah. All right, we begin with chapter 43. This is a Nick chapter, and what a fascinating chapter it is. I think we've had a lot of Nick so far, but I don't think we've had Nick quite as complex and complicated as we see him in this chapter. Part of this is because Nick starts meeting some new people. We catch up with him in the town of May, Oklahoma. He sees a dead man lying in the middle of the road, but that man isn't actually dead. He's Tom Cullen, our newest character, Moon. That spells Tom Cullen. And now, Matt, I think 2 years later, that thing people do in discussion questions all the time that you're like, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? Now, perhaps it finally makes sense.
It finally does. Yes. Yes. I wonder how many other things like that there are that I've just tuned out at this point.
So many, just so many. Oh gosh, Matt, where to start with Tom Cullen? This was honestly the part of the book I was kind of most worried about, Tom and the introduction to Tom and how King depicts Tom. I think it has to be true that King doesn't necessarily always write mentally disabled characters like Tom with the care that I think a reader in the year 2022 would expect an author to have, right? And I think Tom Cullen is overall a character that has aged poorly in the last 45 years since this book came out. But I think the important thing is I don't think that makes him a bad character. I love Tom. I've always loved Tom. I love Tom with Nick. I love their relationship. I love everything we see with them in this 2 chapters. And I think, excessive use of the R word aside, which we will not be using tonight, I think King does a really lovely job establishing who Tom is and defining him as a person and a character. And yes, he has a mental disability that he's struggling with, but he's also just an incredibly rich, wonderful, interesting, lovely person.
Yeah. I mean, Tom is great. He's delightful. He's extremely lovable. He introduced some kind of lightness into the story that has been understandably missing because it's been a fucking nightmare up until this point. So
True.
So having like Tom is sort of this naive source of joy. Actually, he's kind of like a wolf to Nick's Jack. Actually,
Yeah.
He brings that vibe of kind of childish like wonder and a sense that things might be okay. He's strong, he's loyal, he's dependable. I think you could even say noble, like Wolf was. He's as the text communicates, he's not the brightest, but that doesn't really matter to his fundamental worthiness as a human being.
Yeah, totally. And I think the important thing to note, at least in the contents of this one chapter, we haven't seen the rest of Tom's story in this book quite yet, but in the contents of this one chapter, the cruelty at Tom's mental disability comes from character and never from text, right? I don't think the book is cruel to Tom on its own. I think there are people in this book that are very cruel to Tom, Julie being one of them, and arguably, at least in Nick's internal narrative, Nick as well, in some ways, but never the book. The book does not have that attitude. I think the book is very embracing of Tom as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't want to necessarily skip ahead in terms of what I was planning to say too much, but I think it actually is important that Nick might think cruel things but not act upon them. Like we all think cruel things. We all think horrible things.
Well, speak for yourself. My thoughts are perfect.
Yeah, I know, Scott. So the point is it's what we actually say, it's what we actually do that matters.
Yeah.
And especially I think some of the things that Nick thinks and doesn't act on are somewhat juxtaposed against the things that Larry will later say and do.
Yes.
And that's, that feels to me like an intentionally drawn contrast. So yeah, it's I think that Nick is definitely on the right side of the line here.
No, I am not prepared to argue against that at all. I don't think that we'll talk more about this as we get there, but I don't think that's what King's doing here at all. I don't think he's making us question Nick, but yeah. I think overall I love Tom. I love their interaction. I love this just general idea, right? We've got these two characters that we've now put with each other, and one of them can't talk and the other can't read. And so Nick's primary method of communicating, because he cannot talk and cannot hear, is to write out what he says. But Tom cannot get that, right? And so it is this fascinating kind of match made in heaven where they are two characters that really struggle to communicate with each other. Like they have it is and yet they find a way. I think it's really kind of inspiring in a lot of ways, that we kind of cut out Nick's main way of expressing himself to the world with Tom, and yet he finds a way anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot of that kind of thing this week, right? There's many things that jump to the forefront related to failures of communication or the ability to communicate. There's it seems, first of all, pretty much everybody who survived the apocalypse that we know of is working with some kind of mental or physical, or perhaps you could say spiritual disability. It's hard for me to think of a character who doesn't qualify, actually. I mean, even Franny could be considered to have an infirmity in the form of her pregnancy. Stu is actually almost the only person I can think of who is like fine, and I guess he's a widower, so maybe you could view that as a kind of wound that he's taken on.
Sure.
But then you have more sort of obvious impediments, where you have these two characters, and then later we'll have Joe. So there's definitely playing with this idea of communication and people succeeding, I guess, despite obstacles that they have.
Yeah. I think one of the things I wanted to talk to you about here at the very beginning is after being in this chapter for a whole 3 pages in this Nick chapter, and after briefly introducing Tom, King actually switches to Tom's perspective for a few pages here. Nick stops being Nick for a few pages and becomes the man on the bike, or the no talking man, as we see him from Tom's perspective. And I think this is such a great move to really endear you to the character right away, because you immediately empathize with Tom and his general not understanding and confusion about the world and the things he's experiencing and the things that he's seeing. You see through his eyes. King allows you to see through his eyes, and he allows you to understand what he's who he is and what he's doing. So like there's a version of this, and I think the version of this almost kind of rears its head in the Joe chapter, right? The chapter we have next, the Larry chapter with Joe in it, where we don't really ever see anything from Joe's perspective. And so we don't really know what Joe is thinking. We don't really understand who this kid is. And so up until, halfway through the chapter, we're just kind of scared of this wild kid who could hurt our main character. And because we immediately here at the beginning cut into Tom's perspective, there's never really a moment of, is this man dangerous? Is our main character in trouble? Do we need to worry about this guy? The book doesn't want any of that tension in this scene. It wants us to understand Tom is this kind of lovable guy who Nick has stumbled upon, and we should feel very, very, very good about this stumbling upon.
Yeah, that's true. Where the text tries to sustain this kind of mystery and fear when it comes to Joe and Nadine, even to an extent, Tom is just a presence of sweetness and love, actually.
And we also learn that Tom has had the man in the black suit dream. This is going to be also a recurring beat that we'll see throughout the early parts of the book already, but I think it kind of comes to the forefront here in these two chapters, that everyone is having this dream. These two chapters will serve as the first time people start talking to each other about the fact that they're having the same dreams. So I think we're just establishing here early on that Tom is one of those people as well. That it seems like all of our survivors are having this dream, at least one of the two of the dreams, if not both of them. Yeah,
exactly.
I also just wanted to point out for posterity's sake, the first time that Tom says MOON, that spells whatever. I forgot that it's illegal. That the first time he says it is, that spells illegal. I didn't realize that, but that's another classic Kingism of a character having like a slogan or a call sign or something. And that's one of Tom's, as well as law is yes.
Yes.
And all that stuff.
It's delightful. It's very endearing.
Mm-hmm. We do see that here that Tom kind of goes into one of his thinking trances where presumably all of his brain power is devoted to kind of reasoning something out. And so the rest of his body just kind of shuts down. I think this is probably or possibly the closest King comes to being cruel. I wrote down cruel in my notes, but I don't even know if I think cruel is too harsh of a word. But unkind to mentally disabled characters via the character of Tom. I don't know if there's actually, and you're better at science than me, so I don't know if like there's any kind of mental disability that actually goes through a process like this. But I think the important thing from a narrative perspective is this whole moment and the recurring ones where this happens gives Tom something which I think he desperately needs in the story, which is that of agency, right? It allows him to, despite his disability, to be able to reason, to conclude, to figure stuff out. And later we'll see, makes decisions and choices that save Nick's life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I to your first point, I don't know, honestly. Like I did wonder while reading if maybe King, didn't know or witness somebody do something like this thing where Tom kind of, shuts down and processes something and then kind of wakes up again. It's like, oh, I figured it out, maybe, I don't know. It's funny. This is kind of a meta comment, but it's like nowadays writing is just different and reading is different because like the internet and the sort of broad availability of knowledge about everything from every perspective has really changed the way fiction works. Like it used to be prior to like the 2000s, I guess. Like you could write about mental illness, you could write about schizophrenia, say, or whatever, and like 99.7% of your readers who don't have schizophrenia, I looked it up, that's the percentage, will be like, "Yep, sure, it sounds about right. That sounds like what schizophrenia is probably like, hallucinations, whatever, yeah, something like that." And almost nobody will be able to say whether that's an authentic representation of that experience or not, right?
Sure.
The same was true for a lot of different illnesses, a lot of different careers that people could work in, a lot of different belief structures that people could have. You could just make shit up basically. and people would be like, yeah, okay. And now you can go to like reddit.com/r/schizophrenia or wikipedia.org/schizophrenia. And like you can now know more than everybody used to know really easily. You can check so easily now, right? And you can check on things that you almost realistically couldn't have checked, when this book was being written.
Yeah.
And I think that just changes the whole landscape of how we have to think about this kind of thing, actually.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and I don't know. I tried to kind of do a cursory search of how much research King did for this character. There's really nothing out there that I saw. Apologies if I missed something. But yeah, I think you're right that it's just like, I mean, first of all, Tom is just like broadly mentally disabled, right? Like there's no specific kind of examination of exactly what is quote unquote wrong with him. Is he on the spectrum? That's very possible. I don't even think anyone was using the word autism back in 1978. I mean, that's probably not true. There's probably a lot of professionals using the word autism, but I just don't think it was understood in the cultural consciousness even close to a way that it is right now, right?
No. Well, almost nothing was. Like that's what I can't actually ever communicate to my kids is like, how would you know about autism?
Yeah. And you knew someone that was autistic, basically, right?
You know somebody that's autistic, and then somebody tells you, oh, that's autism, or they like, or it happens to be the hot thing in the news or something, right? That's it.
Yeah, it is. It is really difficult to explain to people that were not alive before the internet just how different gaining knowledge was.
Yeah, I mean, I know what I just said might sound a little ridiculous. Like you could look it up in the library if you wanted to, right?
Sure,
but like you're not going to think to do that.
No,
is more my point.
Well, and I mean, like whipping out your phone or sitting down at your desk and typing something up on Google is considerably less effort than traveling to your local library, perusing the Dewey Decimal System, and reading a thick, heavy book about autism.
Yeah,
it's just
right.
Yeah, it is totally different. And so I don't know if King did any research, and to your point, I don't know how much research there was that was like readily available to the public about a character like Tom. I think honestly, I think King is a guy who means very, very well, and he created this character to just be like broadly mentally disabled without any kind of specific thing to hang your knowledge on. I was like, oh, I know this type of mental disability. I know it exactly. I know exactly what this is. I don't think that's what he did. And that's fine. It's not the type of thing a person would do if they were writing a book today. But it certainly was when this book was written.
Right. I mean, it's like books that were written like 150 years ago, you'd have characters who were just like mad, right?
Yeah.
Like he's mad.
Right.
It's like, oh, okay. That's not I mean, what's funny is at the time that is just how they talked about things, right? So anyway,
so all this to being said, Tom uses his brain to kind of reason out that Nick is deaf and dumb, and I love this part where he's so happy about figuring it out. He's so proud of himself figuring it out. And Nick says to himself, Nick had to grin. He couldn't remember when his disability had brought someone so much pleasure. And I love this because it provides a way for Nick to possibly look at his quote unquote disability differently, right? I just have this very clear memory of a few weeks ago thinking back on Nick kind of angrily thinking to himself about how frustrating it was that he can't speak. And so he is completely unable to console the dead. As he was watching all these people around him die, he could not console them. He could not give them the words that they needed to go comfortably and quietly and all these things. And I just can't help but wonder, and I think I said this at the time, but it's like, what if they didn't need your words? Like, what if there are no words that are going to make a person feel better about dying? What if they just needed your presence? What if they just needed you there silently with them so they didn't die alone? Like the motif of this week is community, right? Is loneliness versus community. And what if they just needed you there, Nick? And what if the fact that you couldn't speak was actually a boon for you in this situation, because maybe someone that could speak would be trying to come up with the words and all they needed was you to just sit there quietly. And so I think what we're seeing here, we're opening ourselves up to is through like the good-natured wonderfulness that is Tom. Perhaps it will provide an avenue for Nick to look at his quote-unquote disability differently.
Yeah, I like that idea. I mean, especially when contrasted to certain other characters' propensity to create more problems by opening their damn mouths. Being silent and dependable is sort of a strength in this kind of context.
Yeah. So we see here that Nick almost immediately realizes that Tom has no one else to take care of him, and he will need someone to take care of him. And Nick, because he's Nick, almost immediately signs himself up for the responsibility. I think he has like one small moment of hesitation before basically saying, no, I have to do this. No one else will do this. It's my responsibility. And I like, he does this not without admonishing himself before, right? Because he says, of what possible use could they be to each other? Here you got one guy who can't talk and another guy who can't think. And I'm like, hey, that's you could be the exact use to each other, right? Like you can think for him and he can communicate for you. That sounds like a great combination, actually, Nick.
Yeah, that's funny. I don't think I thought about it that way, but yeah, like they definitely. I mean, the text almost immediately shows that Nick's emotional reaction here is wrong, because in fact Tom does save his life promptly.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but again, what I was saying before, like I think it's actually important that Nick has these kind of unfair thoughts, but then he does the right thing anyway. Like even in this moment, he thinks, "Oh, this guy's just going to be a burden. He's purely going to be a burden to me, and it's hard enough as it is." But then he goes ahead and he does the right thing. Instead of simply never having the unfair thought in the first place, he has the unfair thought and then he does the right thing, even though he doesn't want to, even though it sucks, right? I think, it's easy to do good when it's convenient to do good. Nick's not a saint. He's a good man, which is even more impressive in its way.
No, I think you're totally right. And I think this is such an important aspect of fleshing out human believable characters, right? Because like so much of a book and so much of the conflict between characters is defined by character action. And so if you want a character like Nick, who is, as you said, a good man, you want him to always be the guy that's doing the right thing, because you want people to understand. You want your readers to understand he is essentially a good person, a good man.
Yeah.
But you want him to be complicated too, right? Because just being that good man, just being that Boy Scout, get a little boring. And so the idea that we're allowed to explore the maybe less good sides of a good man via their internal thoughts is something that I think really helps build him into a three-dimensional person. Because I do think it is innately human to look at something and be like, oh, this is going to be a burden on me, actually. Like I am going to have to take care of this person. If I take this burden on, I'm going to have to take care of this person. It's going to be difficult because I struggle to communicate with him. It actually makes it, as you said, more meaningful that he does it anyway, that he looks at the options, he thinks it all out, he recognizes the burden and then does it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So they grab a couple bikes and Tom grabs a little Fisher Price garage thingy that he loves playing with, which just is great. It's so great. Mm-hmm. I love him.
Yeah, me too.
And they head on out, and it isn't long before they come up on a great storm, a tornado, actually. And I love the text here. A horrible darkness was coming out of the west. It was not a cloud. It was more like a total absence of light. It was the shape of a funnel, and at first glance, it looked 1,000 feet high. We grew up in kind of Tornado Alley, Matt. So well, you were kind of further south. Did you see tornadoes a lot? I don't know how many tornadoes get down there.
Oh, I don't know that I've ever seen an actual tornado with my actual eyes.
I certainly have.
Really? That's interesting. No, Houston, I think, is a lot more Gulf weather.
Yeah.
So yeah, interesting. Tell us some tales of tornadoes, Scott.
I don't know. They're all over the place. We get tornado warnings all the time up here, and you don't always see them. But yeah, I know I've definitely been in my house and oh, look, that's a funnel cloud. Oh, look, it's extending downwards. Yep. Okay, that's a tornado. I'm going to get in the bathroom now.
Holy shit. Yeah. I mean, the closest thing I've seen was actually in Denver, where the sky took on this incredible blackness that I've never really seen before. And there was intense hail. And then I later learned that there was a tornado kind of in the vicinity of where I was, but I didn't actually see it. So
it's really strange because the sky will change colors. Like there's a little greenish tint to it sometimes too. And the wind will it is really the calm before the storm thing is a real phenomenon where it's oh, shit's coming. I can feel it. It's wild. And that is exactly what Tom feels here, right? Tom is clearly from this particular part of Tornado Alley, And so he sees the approaching storm, knows exactly what it is, and knows exactly what to do. He kind of grabs Nick and brings him down in a storm shelter in a barn. We see down there is a corpse of a dead family, but also there's someone else. I think this scene is really creepy, Matt. This is kind of reaching back to our creepiness of Larry going through the Lincoln Tunnel. Just the idea that the characters are convinced that there's someone down there with him, and the book like never actually tells us whether this is true or not. We don't actually know if Randall Flagg, the Dark Man, is like down there with them in some magical way. Both Tom and Nick separately get the feeling that he is, and so there's this real moment of like, maybe he was, and we just don't know, which I think really helps increase the creepiness of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to believe that he projected his presence magically to haunt them or something.
Sure.
Or one thing that you didn't mention, but I can't help but wonder is like, was the tornado itself something that he manifested as an attack?
Yeah.
Like we don't know what he can and can't do. I think
I mean, just the general idea of a horrible darkness coming out of the west. It was not a cloud, it was the absence of light. Like this seems very like, obviously this is what storms can do, without any magical influence, but the text wants you to recall Flagg, the Dark Man, and think of this storm as a representation of him more than just your average summer storm.
And it makes sense because this is happening pretty soon after Nick rejected his overtures. And so it's like maybe, he rejected the Man in Black, very firmly. And so the Man in Black's like, all right, this guy's a lost cause. He has thoroughly rejected me. I'm just going to kill him. And then again, I don't know how magical he is. I don't know if this is something he can do, but it kind of seems like a situation where like the darkness tries to kill him, and the white provided him with a pal that could help him hide from that attack.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, even Nick is conscious enough to realize that if he had left Tom behind, like he thought about doing very briefly, he would be dead here. The storm would have come upon him, and he wouldn't have understood the seriousness of it as quickly as he needed to, and he'd be dead. And so there's no. It's very clear here. That is exactly what would have happened, and Tom has already served a very important role in Nick's journey.
Yeah, exactly.
So we kind of already talked about this, but I just want to reiterate one thing that has been set up for the last few weeks, but that is really starting to play out in these chapters in particular, is this general human desire for companionship. Because not only did being with someone else save Nick's life here, right, but just the idea of having a companion makes Nick feel better, makes Nick feel more okay, more rested, more content. This is all, of course, in spite of Glenn Bateman's pessimistic musings on the nature of mankind last week. But I just like, there's this line here. He woke up at dawn the next morning thinking how good it was to be with someone again. What a difference it made. Like there's almost an intangible goodness that comes just from being around other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's, I think this is, crucial to what we're doing in not only this chapter, but also the subsequent Larry chapters, is the necessity of other people to really feel complete and human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's very fitting that this happens in this moment where we're watching these characters kind of slowly gather. Like our groups are coming in contact with each other and getting bigger beat by beat, moment by moment.
Yeah. It's fun to watch this. I don't know. There's something satisfying about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it leads you down like a path of like, what's this going to look like? Like one of the things the book has kind of been slowly teasing us with is this idea of like, okay, so these people are going to come together, and then what? What are they going to try to rebuild a society, and what does that society look like? And what does that have to do with whatever the fuck Randall Flagg's doing out west, Yeah,
right.
So Nick decides that they're going to head to Nebraska. He doesn't really believe that the dreams he's experiencing are real, but it's as good a place to go as any, and he just feels this satisfying call to go there. And this way he gets to take Tom out into, quote, the world, which is this really wonderful sign where Tom briefly becomes Samwise Gamgee, and this is the farthest away from home I've ever been.
See, I thought about making that reference. I held myself back because I already made so many Lord of the Ring references. So I appreciate that you did that for me.
This
But
is
yeah,
what I'm here for.
I love that moment so much.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I mean, like we talked about, obviously, we've talked a lot about how Tom serves a role for Nick, right? That he not only saved him, but maybe allows him to view things differently and experiencing things differently. And I think it's important also that Nick is doing things for Tom as well. Like Tom, we see here, was a character who kind of grew up in the same town, lived in that town. There's actually a lot of parallels between their stories. Because there's this brief story we learn about Tom's history where a bunch of guys jumped him and he had to beat them off, which I think is very specifically trying to parallel the opening of Nick's story. But Nick is providing Tom a door to the rest of the world. Like he is taking him, he is going on this journey with him, and he's going to allow him to experience the world in a way that Tom never would have in his life. You know, apocalypse or no, this is an experience that Tom never would have had. And it's great. You love it.
Yeah, I agree.
So as they head into the world, Nick sees a spooky crow, and that probably means nothing, right? I mean, when have crows ever meant anything in a Stephen King book?
Don't worry, Scott. I'm sure this one is not Gorg specifically. Don't worry. No, it's a Crobane from Dunland in service to Saruman.
Oh, of course.
I mean, what's funny here is, of course, Tolkien was also referencing, Odin and his ravens, right? So there's this ravens, crows, whatever. There's this long tradition of the evil blackbird that watches you and reports back to the bad guy. So, yeah.
So there's this beat that I wanted to talk to you about because I just really love it. They're walking along the road, or they're riding their bikes along the road, and kind of talking about how far away everything is. And Nick is thinking about this, and the text says, "The car ate road and blew miles out its tailpipe. The car was a form of teleportation. The car defeated the map. But now there was no car." I really love this because you and I, throughout the series, especially when these books are very kind of Americana in a lot of ways, talked about how the road trip was something that is kind of quintessentially American, right? We have this big, vast country, and really the way we've conquered this big, vast country is through this incredible invention that is the automobile. And so now in this story, we still have this big, vast country filled with potential and also misery and broken dreams and accomplished dreams and all these things. And we've removed that thing that conquers that country, that defeats the map, as it were. And so what we're left with is just so much fucking space, so much space, and characters that are forced to traverse across this great amount of space. And I love that the book takes the time to kind of muse about this. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I mean, this really does remind me of the Talisman, where there are sections of the book where Jack is walking across America, and you're like, oh my God, he's never gonna make it.
Yeah.
No, I just to sort of draw the contrast between America and not America, I heard a one-liner joke recently, which is Americans think 100 years is a long time, and Europeans think 100 miles is a long way. And I think that just speaks to the way that America is this huge country where everything is connected, and we have this highway system, and we think nothing of driving 100 miles. I probably drive 100 miles just to go to a friend's birthday party, but like not even making a big deal out of it.
Yeah, that's I mean, not much over an hour.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, anyway, I enjoy this. Like I like King's focus on this. It's always fun. It's always it's a fun vibe.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that this is something that he's returned to. You could even say in the Dark Tower, like the Dark Tower, they walk these incredible distances, right? There's a trek vibe there too, right?
Yeah, for sure. So Tom and Nick continue their journey westward until they finally encounter a third person, Julie Lowry. And oh boy, Matt, it's time for this chapter to get a little complicated. Julie is, she's a human, right? She's technically a human.
Apparently.
She is of undiscernible age, but Nick describes her as looking young. King describes her as heavily pimpled, but wearing blue jean shorts that were, quote, abbreviated enough to be mistaken for panties, and is also kind of intimately describing the way she pushes her boobs into Nick over and over again. So that's Julie, man, to come barreling into our story.
Boy, howdy. What a riddle of a character. I was like, where are we going with this?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I figured that out yet.
I don't think we have an answer to that question. And that's the thing I want to kind of focus on the most with you here, because I think it's interesting. The text is very immediately extremely unkind to Julie, right? The way it describes her, like we talked about, Tom Cullen is a man who people like Julie are incredibly cruel to him throughout the story, the way they talk about him, the way they talk to him. But the text is always extremely kind to him. Julie is a character that the text is immediately like, you need to hate this chick. She sucks. She kind of totally sucks. Like just look at how the text describes her talking about the death of her parents. Her face set in martyred lines of grief more appropriate to soap opera heroine than a real person. My mom and dad died 2 weeks ago, Everyone died but me. I've been so lonely. With a sob, she threw herself into Nick's arms and began to undulate against him in an obscene parody of grief. Which, I'm not saying to, diminish, it is very possible that, Julie is just faking all this stuff, right, and is overreacting and performing. Yes, I think that's totally true. But just the way the text chooses to relay that information to us, King is being very clear here. You're not supposed to like this person very much.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because it is quite a bit through Julie's story in this chapter that we finally get a reason to not like her besides the way the text is telling us not to.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. And it's interesting. This is something that I kept thinking about is I feel like when we're in Larry's point of view, we are strong. It's a very strong, close third person.
Mm-hmm.
So what the text says about stuff is really what Larry thinks about it. Here, I lean toward the same. I lean toward this being, well, the text describes her this way because this is basically what Nick thinks about her. But the narration tends to be a little bit more detached from Nick.
Yeah, I think we said that about Nick the first time we met him, and so I think you're right there for sure.
So this is not. I guess I mentioned that I should say this is not necessarily exactly Nick's thoughts about her. Like if Larry was meeting her, I feel like we would just be like, Larry thinks she sucks, whereas here it's a little bit more objective. That's my take anyway.
Sure, but I mean, to be fair, Nick also very very quickly thinks she sucks too.
It's true.
But before that, he gets down because Julie immediately wants to bone, and Nick is just like, oh okay, let's fucking do it.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about this for a little bit because I find so much of this very, very fascinating from just a storytelling perspective. Because while it is true that Julie sucks, and I think a lot of this chapter is doing a lot of heavy lifting to make us understand exactly how and why Julie sucks, I'm not sure Nick comes out of this particular interaction looking like that great himself. Now, I'm no prude. Two people want to have meaningless drugstore sex, more power to them. Do it, right? But I think the way in which King specifically makes note to mention how Nick, upon learning Julie's age, is relieved that she's 17. That oh, she's closer to my age than I thought she was, which means he thought she was younger than 17, which means he was like, all right, 15-year-old, let's fucking do it.
I guess there's no laws anymore.
Which is what are we supposed to feel about that?
I mean, first of all, I don't think he was thinking about laws. I think he was just horny and
yeah, fair.
And did it.
But you were certainly correct. But it remains fascinating that we do take the time to specifically mention, oh, whew, she's 17. Whew. Good. Yeah. Glad I didn't do anything technically illegal there.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, it's So you mentioned the idea of like, what are we doing with this storytelling wise, right? And I'm like, I don't know. There's too many angles for me to figure it out yet. You know, this is Kingslingers, so we're either gonna go Lord of the Rings or we're gonna go Odyssey. I guess I'm gonna go Odyssey here and just say like, this kind of reminded me of like Calypso seducing Odysseus and keeping him distracted from his duty. And I guess I'm trying to connect that to the idea that Julie is placed in the story to kind of offer Nick something that he wants, but which conflicts with, you know, what is right, you know, which you can make the analogy like to go back to his crew, which is now Tom. And the way he reacts to this challenge is, well, he is seduced. He is successfully seduced, but then when he's kind of confronted with the idea that this is going to be bad for his crew, for Tom, he reverses his choice.
Sure. No, I think you're right.
So again, I think once again we're seeing like the thing with Nick is like, it's not that he doesn't make mistakes, it's that he pretty much immediately recognizes them as mistakes when it's made clear to him, and then he does the right thing. I think that's the key.
No, I think you're right. And we see here that like post-coital, Nick like is like immediately like, oh, I fucked up. Because he like immediately becomes annoyed with her, right? Which I mean, again, fair. Julie does seem kind of annoying and awful. But I think there's this really interesting moment here where they've had sex. They are kind of returning to go see where Tom is. Julie sees Tom standing far away and points at him and says, "Oh, is that the R word?" Right? And suddenly Nick, who has used this exact word to describe Tom a dozen times before in his head, suddenly decides, "Oh, I don't like that word. That's a cruel word." And that's really fascinating, right? Because I think I'm not going to call it hypocritical, because I think what it actually is Nick was using this word in his mind. And again, I don't think he ever says it out loud to Tom, because that's not the type of person Nick is. But he uses this word in his mind and he doesn't really think much of it. And then the word comes from Julie, comes from a cruel person. And he suddenly is like, huh, that's actually not a good word. And I never thought about it that way before. It took hearing it, or I guess seeing it in his point of view from someone else, for me to realize that maybe I shouldn't be using that word either. And so, yeah, I mean, you kind of see her get worse and the way that plays off of him. But I still have a butt there. We haven't gotten to the butt yet, but I still have the butt there.
Well, let's get to that butt then.
Okay. So, like, basically what we go through here is that Julie is talking incessantly. She talks a lot. She's talking about herself. She gives us a brief story of her life and what led her here. And after she does that, she decides she wants to bang again. And as you pointed out, this time Odysseus rejects Calypso, and it does not go well. She does not like this. This is the moment where Julie turns really nasty. And I think the text here is so interesting. Nick looked at her expressionless. He had been called worse names, but there was something in her look that he very much did not like, some restless instability. If she got angry with you, she wouldn't yell or slap your face. Not this one. This one would claw you. It came to him with sudden surety that she had lied about her age. She wasn't 17 or 14 or 21. She was any age you wanted her to be, as long as you wanted her more than she wanted you, needed her more than she needed you. She came across as a sexual creature, but Nick thought that her sexuality was only a manifestation of something else in her personality, a symptom. Symptom was a word you used for someone who was sick, though, wasn't it? Did he think she was sick? In a way, he did, and he was suddenly very afraid of the effect she might have on Tom. So, I mean, this is a lot of armchair psychoanalyzing that Nick is doing after knowing a person for 20 minutes, right? But so I guess the question I have for you to kind of broach this conversation is Nick being fair to Julie here?
I mean, look, probably not entirely, but also I think this gives us a great trailhead to talk about, like, how much charity do you owe a person who's acting really awful toward you and others?
Sure.
But like, set aside the armchair psychologizing. Like, I think you're allowed to just be like, your vibes are fucking awful and I don't want to be around you. You could say, hey, Julie's a traumatized child. She ought to be forgiven for her transgressions. She's in a really rough spot. Like, yeah, and maybe so. I can empathize with that intuition. I can understand where that's coming from. That's very noble. But I also have an intuition that you don't need to invite somebody like this into your life if they're just evidently behaving this way.
Uh-huh.
Like, you don't need to have a diagnosis to be like, you are a fucking tornado, literal tornado, figurative tornado, whatever. I don't need to invite you into my life because you're going to mess everything up. And it's even more, risky in this situation where there's life or death. Like, I think we've all had to deal with people like this, not in a post-apocalypse setting, but we've all had people where you're just like, man, I can immediately tell that you're going to be a problem. It's just volatile and destructive type of personality, right?
Yeah.
And I think the question is like, do you owe it to them to let them keep fucking up your shit just because they come from a bad background and maybe it's not their fault in some sense?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I don't want this to be the bashing Nick hour because he didn't like attempt to help Julie fix herself or something. But I think it's interesting in the way it parallels with the character of Joe, right? Joe is this incredibly traumatized child who is incredibly dangerous, who walks around with a butcher knife and actively tries to kill Larry. And we could have said the same thing with Joe, right? Like, I don't need this shit in my life. This is like, get the fuck away from me, kid. We're leaving you behind. And then, just very quickly, as we'll cover next chapter, like they unlock something in Joe that seems to like bring him back from the brink of this kind of animalistic, broken behavior. And it's just like, could we have done that with Julie? Like, I think you're absolutely right that someone at some point in Julie's life taught her that she can get what she wants, or she can like get through situations by offering herself up sexually, right? Like someone like that's learned behavior, right? Someone taught Julie that. And it's like, you can, if you squint, see this entire interaction from her point of view of like this incredibly terrified person who comes across other people for the first time and is like, oh my God, thank God there's other people here. I need to get them to take me with them. The only way I know how to do that is to show my value. And the only thing I think I have of value is my sexuality. And so I'm just going to give this up to this guy. And then after I do that, he rejects me and I panic because if I don't have this, I don't have anything else. And so I immediately fall back on my worst traits, which is to turn mean and nasty, right?
Yeah.
Like you can write that line. And so I think you're totally right that Nick has no obligation to like take this person under his wing and like, repair them and set them out into the wild again or something. But it's just, you can very easily see a line of like, could we have helped Julie become a better person? Yeah. And it just seems like we're not going to get that now.
Right. And that's, that's kind of why I tried to phrase my little rant there as a question. Cause I don't know, there's like I think the Christian thing to do is probably to take Julie with you and try to help her. And so I guess in that sense, yeah, I mean, Nick is being a little bit more of a pragmatist here, which it's hard to fault him for trying to, not take on a rattlesnake as a traveling companion. But at the same time, it's like, well, we did just applaud him for taking on Tom, who he at the time thought was going to just be a pure liability. And so it's like there is a contradiction there. I think. I mean, even within my own feelings, I feel a contradiction.
Yeah. And I'm with you on this too. I feel very conflicted about this. I don't want to make it seem like I was arguing for the no, you must help Julie side, like without question. And this makes Nick a bad person for not doing this. I think to get to the kind of the bottom of this is, I think King wants us to feel conflicted in this moment, right? I think he wants us to question this. And be like, how do I feel about this? How do I feel about people? What does it mean to become a community again? And what do we do with the people that maybe serve a threat to that community, but maybe deserve a place in it as much as anyone else does? And And there's not a clear answer here. And I think, to compound upon this, Matt, once again, we have this moment where Nick returns with Julie and some Pepto for Tom's ailing stomach, and Tom is afraid of medicine, and Julie, in her pissed off state, decides to tell him to be afraid of the Pepto because it's poison. And Nick loses his shit at this moment and slaps Julie across the face. And so once again in this book, we have another beat of domestic violence against women. And again, it's like, I don't know how to feel about that again, which is like, because my gut reaction is, that was bad, Nick. Don't do that. That you should not do that. Even if what she was doing was incredibly mean and nasty, I don't like that. And so again, I leave this chapter with like this feeling of, I'm not sure how I feel about what's happening here.
Right. And there's a little bit of point of view goggles impacting things, because I think it's framed within the story as being sort of like an act of violence in service of justice. Like it's an unpleasant task that must needs be done. You can imagine Roland doing the exact same thing in this position, just cuffing a woman for causing him this kind of problem, right? And but it's like, but Roland is kind of an asshole, actually, and we don't think that what he does is always the right thing,
right? And this is Nick Andros, who up until this moment has kind of been like Jesus. Like he's been like the perfect patient, like is going to always do the right thing character, and then we've really thrown some wrenches into this. And I'm not saying this to build up this thing where, is Nick gonna go to the dark side because he slapped a woman? It's like, I don't know if that's what we're trying to do, but I do think that like it just complicates this character. It just makes you go, how do I feel about this? Because there's this other beat. I didn't pull the actual quote, but like Julie's like, I'm coming with you and you can't stop me. And Nick's, again, internal response to that is, yeah, I can. Don't you understand how this thing works now? Is like, I can do whatever I want. If I don't want you to come with us, I can make you not come with us. And I'm like, that's true, Nick, but Christ, that's like an escalation. And that's one of the things he does here is he says, we don't need you. You're not coming with us. And as she's pleading with him to stay, he pulls his gun on her and basically says, get the fuck out of here. And it's just like, again, I don't know. Julie sucks. Like, Julie sucks. I'm not trying to sugarcoat that. I'm not like in defense of Julieing this passage, but how am I supposed to feel about this?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is interesting at the very least to see how the situation might look from Julie's perspective. Yeah, he pulls a gun on her, and then the next thing that happens is she shoots at them.
Yes.
And in the moment, again, protagonist goggles, you're like, holy shit, she escalated this to 11, and then it's like, did she? Because he pulled a gun on her. So when somebody pulls a gun on, look, I'm going to be honest. If somebody pulls a gun on me, I don't necessarily feel that it's escalating to use that level of violence in response. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure. So she feels like her life is in danger, understandably, right? So, and that's not something that Nick is thinking about. He's also not thinking about the fact that she could very easily like follow them and shoot them in their sleep.
Yeah.
He's not thinking about a lot of things when it comes to Julie. So I think there's like a blind spot happening here, actually.
I think you're right. And I think it's fascinating because I do think in the moment, like her, running up into the second floor of a building and opening fire on them with a rifle is supposed to be seen as like vindication, right? That's like, yeah, she was just as crazy and as bad as Nick thought she was. And so this is vindication. We made the right decision. And I'm not saying it's not that, but I am fascinated by the way in which there is some ambiguity here in this chapter that I'm not quite sure. And look, I think like 20 readers will all have different takes. I'm sure the first time I read this, I had no ambiguity. I was like, Julie sucks. Fuck this girl. Get out of there, Nick. She sucks. Take your precious Tom and make sure he's safe. And that's the priority. But yeah, it's fun kind of looking at this from the other angle for sure.
No, I definitely had a lot less ambiguity when I was reading it. But you have actually convinced me that there is more ambiguity than I had initially perceived.
I wonder if that ambiguity is supported by the writer, or if this is just the fun of reading, is that you can insert that ambiguity yourself if you have a certain take on things. I don't know. I guess the question I'm asking is, how does Stephen King want you to feel about Nick leaving this chapter, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it depends on the circumstances that we, the book implies that we might meet Julie again. Maybe.
Yeah, that is that is true, because one of the last sentences of the chapter is, "At least we're shut of that hellion," he thought, but that turned out to be only half true.
Well, which half, Stephen?
I guess we'll have to find out.
Yeah. No. So yeah. What we end up doing with her, I think, might help us understand what we were trying to do here.
Yeah. Definitely. But the chapter here ends with Tom and Nick walking along the road again, and what approaches them but a car, the thing that eats the map, Matt. That we find a car, and behind the wheel of this car is a character named Ralph, who we'll learn about in a later chapter.
Ah, good old Ralph. There's never a bad Ralph in Stephen King.
That's true. With the sample size of one Ralph, that's enough.
One Ralph. Yep.
All right, we move on to our second and final chapter of the week. It's a Larry chapter, chapter 44. And finally, Matt, it's a Larry chapter in which we're not going to shit talk Larry for the entire time.
Yay.
We've done this whole thing. We shit talked Nick, surprisingly, and we're going to... What's the opposite of shit talking? Kind talking?
Yeah, we're going to talk him up.
Sure.
We're gonna.
There needs to be a phrase like shit talking, but for like saying really nice things about a person to someone else.
I feel like there is, but I just can't think of it right now. So
I think it's called a compliment.
Yeah, right.
So at the beginning of this chapter, Matt, we catch up with Larry, who is not doing well. We learn that he's been walking nonstop for days and days and days, trying to outwalk his guilt, perhaps. And we see here that it is not working. I love the kind of the opening lines of the chapter. He's talking about the 60s and talking about music and kind of rambling. And we see here the first line, "Fuck it," Larry opined once again. He looked terrible, a pale, frail phantom stumbling upon a New England highway. "Give me the 60s. Sure, the 60s. Those were the days." I think there is something so perfect at the opening of the chapter about Larry running away from his problems or walking away from his problems, while also looking back and being nostalgically reminiscent of a time period that, let's be honest here, he never actually experienced, right? This is one of those moments where the book gets kind of weird with the time changes of moving it forward a decade, right? But like, if Larry is supposed to be in his early 20s in the 1990s, he was a toddler in the 60s, right? He's only remembering an idea of a time, not the time itself. And I think this still kind of works if we go back to the original time with Larry being like 23 in 1980. So the 60s were his adolescence, so he probably wasn't experiencing the 60s like he's reminiscing about here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right. It's kind of silly. I mean, it all builds toward this picture of this mildly unhinged man wandering down the highway, mumbling to himself. I mean, it's fun to literally just imagine, him going, "Fuck it, give me the 60s," and like a third person watching that and being like, "What the hell is he talking about?" Yeah,
and it's fun to compare him with the screaming monster man from Central Park, right? A man who kind of went unhinged much quicker than Larry did, but Larry's kind of gotten there himself. Where like, if you walk by this man, you probably steer clear of him right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm, yeah.
So we learned that at night, Larry is plagued by dreams of the dark man, but during the day, he's plagued by the, quote, big alone, and of course by Rita. And there's part of you, I think, that's kind of like, good, right? Good, Larry. You're finally alone, nothing and no one to take from. All you have is yourself. And this is perhaps the exact kind of catalyst that could lead towards you making some changes. And we do see later in the chapter that it does exactly that. So I think, I don't know, I feel bad for Larry, but also there was moments where I was like, good, I'm glad you're going through this right now.
Yeah, we expected, I think, that Larry would need to go through hell to undergo change. Mm-hmm. And he's undergone some change for sure.
Yeah.
He's undergone some suffering. But I think what remains to be seen is, has he suffered enough to save his soul?
Yeah. We will see. So Larry finally collapses, exhausted. And as he's sleeping, we get to see two more new characters, Matt. We get to see Nadine and Joe. They approach him in his sleep, the latter carrying a giant butcher knife ready to stab him with.
What an interesting development.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting. All of our new book 2 characters are quite striking in different ways.
Yeah.
I just find Nadine and Joe as a pair are just such a, it's like, whoa, where'd this come from? This feels like it's coming from a whole different book.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Like we're going to talk about them obviously, but it's so interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because we met all of our other characters pre-apocalypse, right? Like we meet Larry as a normal human being trying to survive in the world. Same with Stu, same with Franny, same with Nick. And all these characters are characters we meet post-apocalypse. These are people that have already gone through all this bad. And so we're meeting them after they've undergone that kind of change. Or perhaps, we don't actually know. Like we don't know who Joe was before this happened. We don't know who Nadine was before this happened. All we can do is speculate. And so, yeah, they do seem different. They seem more specifically genre in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I like that way of putting it. It's because that's what I was getting at when I said it feels like they're coming from different stories. It's like they're halfway through an arc that we haven't actually seen.
Yeah.
And we're playing catch up. We're trying to figure out what their deal is, and that's really entertaining.
Mm-hmm. And I love that we meet both Nadine and Joe before Larry does. I think it allows us to see them through Stephen King's lens and not Larry's lens. Like we get to see the character of Joe as like immediately portrayed as this dangerous and wild child. But Nadine, well, she's another mystery, Matt. I love this way. Like look at how evocative and mysterious this text is. The woman came out. She was tall and imposing, but seemed not to move the bushes at all. Her hair was thick, luxuriant black streaked with thick blazes of purest white. Attractive, startling hair. It was twisted into a cable that hung over one shoulder and trailed away only as it reached the swell of her breast. When you looked at this woman, you first noticed how tall she was, and then your eyes would be dragged away to the hair, and you would consider it. You would think how you could almost feel its rough yet oily texture with your eyes. And if you were a man, you would find yourself wondering what she would look like with that hair unpinned, freed, spread over a pillow in a spill of moonlight. You would wonder what she would be like in bed. But she had never once taken a man herself. She was pure. She was waiting. There had been dreams. Once in college, there had been a Ouija board. And she wondered again if this man might be the one. So you read all this and you're like, wow, that's really evocative. But what? What? Virgin Nate, what, huh?
Yeah,
huh?
sort of princess of prophecy. Like, I mean, they're both fascinating, right? We got Joe, who, unless I missed something, we really don't get an explanation for. No. Is Joe a feral child? Was he neglected? Is he just traumatized? What gives there?
Yeah, she finds him in front of a house where there are dead people, and she just kind of assumes those are his parents or his family. But yeah, we don't know. We don't know.
We have no idea, right? Yeah, and then Nadine. She's like the most mysterious in quotes King character that I can recall. Like she's just this mess of like evocative hints without real solid background, and she even looks like she has this like statuesque, very solidly drawn appearance. She looks mysterious. It's very unusual. I can't think of any other similar characters in any Stephen King stories we've read.
Yeah, no, she's great. I really, it is kind of delicious to go back and read how much King is doing with the text. Like it seems like every moment we're either in her head or observing her, he's just like, and now I'm gonna say, ooh, Nadine, mystery. It's really fun, actually.
I mean, but I guess we'll wait to talk about my speculations until later. But yeah, like it really invites you to wonder and ponder, like what could that mean?
Yeah. What could? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. The next bit of the chapter is kind of this weird, interesting cat and mouse game where Larry continues to walk east. He wakes up a little bit more refreshed, a little bit more himself, and we see here that he kind of senses and knows that there are at least two people following him, and he's excited about that fact. He's kind of welcoming of it because he's so freaking lonely. And then on the other half, we have Nadine like both, for some reason we don't fully understand, like really interested in following Larry, wanting to be around people, wanting to bring around this man in particular, and also performing an important function of stopping Joe from murdering him,
Mm-hmm.
which he is increasingly trying to do at every moment.
Yeah, it's really very interesting. It's an interesting sort of tension because like you kind of implied there, Nadine could just not follow him, like that would solve the problem of Joe trying to kill him. But there's something that compels her to follow him. But then there's also something that compels her to not just announce herself to him. There's this, and we're not entirely sure. We're not entirely blind to all the variables at play, but we're also not entirely sure what all of the variables are, and that's. I don't know. It's a really fun kind of tension and uncertainty.
Yeah. So I guess this is probably as good a time as any to talk about Joe, at least as he's presented in this first half of the chapter. Basically just a savage little animal. Like his stuffed animal is a butcher's knife. And this, I mean, like, look at this writing. He pointed at the screen and the dark lump in the sleeping bag beyond the screen. He made a horribly explicit gesture, drawing his thumb across his throat at the Adam's apple. Then he grinned. Nadine had never seen him grin before, and it chilled her. It could not have been more savage if those gleaming white teeth had been filed to points. So, like, we're not fucking around with this kid, right? This isn't, like, supposed to be like, oh, it's like a cute, he's like a wild child, but he's not actually going to hurt anyone. No, this is like, if you did not stop him, Nadine, he probably would have just slit this guy's throat, which leads you to believe, has he done that before? Like, how many other throats has Joe slit? So, I mean, I guess what's your early take on Joe here?
So I think I fit him into the framework that I've been using so far. Like, if we view each character as someone that could either serve the white or serve the dark, then I see Joe as almost the perfect blank slate. He is state of nature. He could go either way. He could go just as easily either way. Unlike Larry is starting with baggage. He's starting with a life history. He's starting with a bunch of bullshit that he kind of has to clear out. Larry could also go either way, but Larry could go either way in kind of an adult way, whereas Joe is starting from this savage innocence, this true blank slate innocence. And if the people around Joe show him kindness, then he will be kind and good. We start to see that happen. If they show him violence and pain, then he will become a device of violence and pain. And it could, again, we see that in him as well, right?
Sure.
So that's what I think we're doing with Joe.
Okay, that's great. Well, we will see where that goes, but I mean, it is great to see like how quickly he becomes more than just this savage little kid, and just in this chapter alone.
Exactly.
Yeah. So later that day, Larry makes it to the Atlantic Ocean, the end of a journey that started all the way out west. So he's basically Jack Sawyer again. I love the way the text views the ocean as this cleansing object where Larry can both literally and figuratively wash his sins away and be reborn in a way. Like, I love the text calls it Land's End. There's nowhere else to run. There's nothing to do here but turn around and face everything, right? Face the entirety of the world as he knows it. You know, he turns around and all of America is before him. Everything, all the good, all the bad, all the hope, all the opportunity, everything is before him.
Yeah, there's something really poetic about, facing west.
Yeah.
And seeing the whole country before you.
Yeah. And it is in this moment of washing away and clarity and rebirth that Joe and Nadine finally make their appearance in front of Larry. And by make their appearance, I mean Joe sprints onto the beach brandishing a knife and tries to stab him to death.
Do we ever learn what prompted Joe to pick this as his moment? Did they say that and I missed it? No,
nothing specific. No. I mean, that's an interesting thought. Like what is why? I mean, we can reason his hatred of Larry comes from a form of jealousy, which I think is really fun to kind of parallel with Harold Lauder and Stu from last week. But no, we don't really know. Just kind of happens.
Yeah. Okay.
So Larry easily drops the kid and holds him down, and then we get maybe the most important moment of the book so far for Larry, right? Because as Nadine looks at the injury that Larry gave Joe as he was dealing with him, Larry feels this need arise in him, this need to defend himself, to make excuses, to demand acknowledgement that what he did was not a bad thing, it was the necessary thing, and to need to be told once again that he is a nice guy. And in this moment, Larry doesn't do that. He doesn't try to defend himself. He just allows the situation be what it is. It's an obvious situation. He doesn't need to be the guy that makes excuses. He doesn't need to be the guy that's trying to convince himself and other that he's a nice guy. It's just, this is what happened. And that's change, right? That's change in Larry. And of course, it is change in Larry that Larry himself recognizes. He says, I think I've changed somehow. I don't know how much. And so my question to you, Matt, is, has he?
I mean, somewhat, yeah. I think he's right in noticing that he's changed. He has gone through the gauntlet. But as we'll see later, that doesn't mean he can rest on his laurels. That doesn't mean that it's going to be easy from now on. Mm-hmm. But I'm not. I think he's in a much better place than he was before. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. So Nadine immediately wants to go with Larry, but Larry's not so sure about Joe, the animal kid who just tried to murder him. And so we get this moment. Would you consider leaving him? There it was, spat out like a lump of rock, and he still didn't sound like much of a nice guy. But was it right? Was it fair to either of them to make a bad situation worse by burdening themselves with the 10-year-old psychopath? He had told her he was going to sound brutal, and he supposed he had. But they were in a brutal world now. So what's your reaction to this, right? I mean, yeah. I think, again, this is a very understandable reaction, right?
Well, it's exactly the kind of thing that you could imagine Nick having said about Julie, almost verbatim, can we make a bad situation worse by burdening ourselves with this 17-year-old psychopath? It's pragmatic, it's understandable, but also it's not very noble.
Yeah. Well, and I think perhaps the better contrast with Joe is Tom himself, right? I mean, there are two characters that have some sort of issue. we don't really know what's wrong with Joe, but we could call it a mental disability of some sort. Like something's wrong with him.
Yeah.
And is it it's probably just trauma related, probably. But we have a character named called Tom that is a burden as well. And I wonder, it makes you wonder, because we don't really get this choice, right? Because Nick takes it upon himself to take Tom up. Larry takes Joe with him because Nadine kind of says, we'll come with you, but Joe's coming too, right? So it's like, you wonder, had Larry come across Joe by himself, would he have just said, fuck off, kid. I don't have time for this.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's interesting. I don't know, actually. I do wonder. I do wonder. This version of Larry, who has changed somewhat, but not. He is not a saint. We're just not sure.
Yeah, I think it's too early for Larry to complete his arc. So I don't think the expectation should be that, oh, Larry, why you just said you changed and then you did this thing and turns out you're not a great person actually, Larry. It's complicated, and I think you're absolutely right in what you said with Julie. Like, what do they owe the random people they encounter on the road? How much do they owe them? How much should they be responsible for them? And it's not an easy answer, because Joe is dangerous. He could kill Larry in his sleep at any moment. He could. But also, by choosing to take him with them, they have done something for Joe, something incredibly important. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, and we're about to see, the big surprise with Joe is that there's much more to him than just being a dangerous monster.
Yep. So we already talked about this, but I just want to reiterate the ominous weirdness that exists around Nadine at all times. I love this. I love this part right here. She said, they're talking about taking Joe rather, and Larry's like, well, if he's your responsibility, and she's like, yeah, no, I totally. It's like, well, that'll be cold comfort to me if he murders me. And her response is, well, that would be on my heart for the rest of my life, Nadine said, and a sudden certainty that all her words about the sanctity of life would someday not too distant rise up to mock her sweep her like a cold wind. And she shuddered. No, she told herself. I'll not kill. Not that. Never that. And you're just like, what?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Who like, imagine.
Who is she?
Imagine you're just like, oh, there's a lost puppy. I will protect this lost puppy. And if this lost puppy were to get run over by a car, that would be on my heart for the rest of my life. And then you immediately go, oh, but one day there will come a time where my hypocrisy will reign and all the puppies will rue that day. And it's, what? What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like she knows something. She knows something beyond what everyone else knows.
Yep.
Maybe she knows the future. There's a Ouija board, you know. Maybe the dark man has told her things in her dreams. I mean, we suspect that is true as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
None of that quite explains this. She reminds me of like a fae, you know, creature or someone gifted with prophecy who has insights that no one else has, you know.
Yeah, I think a fae creature is a perfect metaphor because you know, out of all the characters we've seen, if we take Randall Flagg out of the equation, she is the one that feels the most magical in a way, and I think it's just because of this rich mystery surrounding her. I'm not saying she's magical; it's just the feeling you get when she's talking, when she's thinking.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say earlier that she seems like a fantasy character. She seems like a character out of a fantasy novel.
Yeah, no, I like that. All right. Later that night, they're sitting on the sand, hanging out, and Larry starts playing the guitar he found. And this seems to almost have a magical effect on Joe, who is not only calmed and amazed by the instrument, but then manages to pick it up and just play it himself not long after this. It's this really magical moment, actually, this concert that Larry puts on. And just an FYI for those listening, you should head to our subreddit, reddit.com/r/doofmedia, where Reddit user Coach Wargo has actually just put together a playlist of all the songs that Larry played on the beach that night. So that was a fun thing that I listened to as I was pulling the notes and preparing the script. It's just really fun to kind of be completely surrounded by that kind of music.
Yeah, I started listening to it as well. It was fun.
Yeah.
I really appreciated that. That it really helped sort of get into the vibe of the story.
Yeah. And I love the way King writes Joe's reaction to the guitar, right? The boy was grinning now, grinning in that amazed way of someone who had discovered a glad secret. Larry thought he looked like someone who had been suffering from an unreachable itch between his shoulder blades for a long, long time and had finally found someone who knew exactly where to scratch.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. I love when King writes about music.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you, you know, you can't really hear it, but you get the same feelings. It's really great.
Yeah. Well, and I love how it compares to the grin he made earlier, right? So like we had seen him grin earlier, and Nadine described this grin as savage. His teeth looked like the only way you could make that grin look more savage is if you filed his teeth down to points. And he's grinning here. This is another grin, but this is a grin of amazement, of happiness, of contentness. And it's really wonderful. It really is.
Yeah.
And it's, again, I'm going to repeat myself. It's hard not to think about Julie in this moment, right? The idea of, I love that central idea of having a scratch between your shoulder blades that you can't itch, and all you need is someone to come across along and itch that for you. And Joe had not had that, and Larry came and was that for him. And what if Julie had an itch and they declined to scratch that itch for her? Well, we don't even know she had one kind of itch, right? Sex.
Yeah. But that was the wrong kind of itch. That was her want, not her need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you're right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hate that you're right because it's really easy and convenient to just hate Julie and say that she's bad.
Yeah.
But
and I don't want to I don't want people like emailing me and was like, you were way too nice to Julie, who's an absolute jerk. Yes, she is. She sucks. Julie sucks. But let's be clear about that. But she doesn't just suck.
Yeah.
I've got so many sex jokes in my head, so we just got to move on.
Yeah, I think it just, left as an exercise to the listener.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I really, it's kind of almost a non sequitur, but maybe not, because I love this moment where Larry, as they're kind of walking along the coastline, Larry sees these ugly carbon copy beach houses all along the coast, and he has this very complex reaction that I found particularly interesting. Larry was drawn two painful ways by these things. Part of him clamored at the sad and blatant ugliness and at the ugliness of the mines that had turned this section of a magnificent savage coastline into one long highway amusement park for families and station wagons. But there was a more subtle, deeper part of him that whispered of the people who had filled these places and this road during other summers. Ladies in sun hats and shorts too tight for their large behinds, college boys in red and black striped rugby shirts, girls in beach shifts and thong sandals, small screaming children with ice cream spread over their faces. They were American people, and there was a kind of dirty, compelling romance about them whenever they were in groups. Never mind if the group was in an Aspen ski lodge or performing their prosaic arcane rites of the summer along US 1 in Maine. And now all of those Americans were gone. A thunderstorm had ripped a branch from a tree, and it had knocked the giant plastic dairy treat sign in the ice cream stand's parking lot, where it lay on its side like a pallid dunce cap. The grass was starting to get long on the mini golf course. This stretch of highway between Portland and Portsmouth had once been a 70-mile amusement park, and now it was only a haunted funhouse where all the clockwork had run down. Not very pretty, no, he said, but once it was ours, Nadine. Once it was ours, even though we were never here before. Now, it's gone. That's fucking beautiful. That's beautiful. I love the complexity of that. I love the idea of we destroy the world we live in, right? We destroy this beautiful savage coastline, but there's also something beautiful in the way people exist together.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the word romance. The word romance really jumped out to me there. Mm-hmm. The idea that there's this ineffable romance to the boisterous, flamboyant existence of these Americans. I also love, he says, now all those Americans were gone.
Yeah.
He doesn't say now all those people were gone. He says now, very, very specifically, targeting the
quintessentially Chuck Berry Americanism. Yeah.
This is more, I'm glad you said that, because this is directly tying back to what we talked about at the very beginning with those quotes, the exuberant, sort of amazing, kind of dirty, messy, chaotic potential of America.
Yeah. And this kind of leads into another conversation where Larry says, because we're looking for other people, Larry said. Now, why do you think we're doing that? She gazed at him, troubled. Well, because it's the right thing to do, she said. People need other people. Didn't you feel that when you were alone? Yes, Larry said. If we don't have each other, we go crazy with loneliness. When we do, we go crazy with togetherness. That's brilliant. I love that turn of phrase. I think it's 100% true. And it's this really, we talked about dichotomy at the very beginning of the episode, and it's this really fascinating thing the book is presenting to us, because we have all these characters and they're very clearly starting to gather, right? At the end of this chapter, another woman is going to join these three people. And so we'll have our first group of four. And then we know there's another group of four we'll see from a signpost that Harold leaves. And then we have Nick and so people are going to the same place and starting to gather. And so the question becomes, okay, then what, right? Like, what does the world look like when all these people start to get together? What do we do? How do we create? What do we create? What does it look like? Do we try to make something reminiscent but better? Do we make the same thing all over again? What do we do? And I think the book is kind of laying the groundwork for what the answers to these questions the characters will choose, with beautiful scenes like this, examining the nature of people and community and togetherness and the want and desire of those things. I love it so much.
Me too. I love that it comes out of Larry's mouth too, because I think this is a sign. It's a kind of wisdom coming out of his mouth that I don't know that he was capable of prior to his spirit quest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Larry, the Larry that we met, it didn't seem like he valued people that much, right?
Mm-hmm.
He used them. He's a taker. He valued them for what they could give him, specifically in things and enjoyment and pleasure. He didn't value them just for their, as you said, ineffable humanness. And I think he's kind of learned that.
Yeah, seems like it. Seems like he has come to appreciate humans for more than what he can get out of them, at least somewhat.
Yeah.
Getting there.
So the two catch up with Joe originally, and it's there they find that old message left for them by Harold Lauder. This is the original message he left in Algonquin, Maine, and because they're people, because they've met or they've seen evidence of more people, Nadine and Larry decide that they're going to follow Harold and head up to the Vermont Disease Center. So Larry also in this moment does some investigating, and he finds a trail of payday candy wrappers left by Harold, because Harold loves those paydays, Matt. And that leads him to discover a few things. The first is that while he was up in the barn, Harold has creepily carved a heart in the wood and wrote HLLFG. Harold Lauder loves Franny Goldsmith, which, I mean, I guess that's adorable if they were in a relationship of any kind.
Well, here's the thing, Scott. Harold thinks they are.
Oh, Harold.
So, and remember, this is right after she kissed him on the mouth. By the way, I'm just going to mention that again.
Did you catch the beat where, like, Larry looks at the paint and says, like, "Oh man, if they had left the paint up here, the whole fucking barn would have burned down because it's so hot up here that the paint would have caught fire and burned the barn down." And it was Franny that was like, "Harold, why aren't you just leaving the paint? Why are you putting the effort in to take the paint all the way down?" And Harold's like, "I don't know, just seems like the right thing to do." So
no, I didn't tie that back. I mean, we're going to see many beats of Larry like seeing all of this competence in Harold, which I would argue in some cases is actually there.
Yeah, I mean, we've been I think fairly cruel to Harold throughout the book so far. But yeah, I mean, that doesn't diminish the fact that he is a semi-competent individual. Like he is figuring things out. He's making plans. Harold is a human. And so he's got many sides to him. And while his bad sides are awful, he's also a dude, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, he is actually resourceful. He's just such a weirdo that whenever we're like around him POV wise, he doesn't come off as impressive. He comes off as annoying. And if he just shut his mouth, took a page out of Stu's book, then he'd actually come off looking a lot better than he does. Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing, right? Because what we're doing here actually is, as Larry is like learning about Harold through both the sign and the evidence he's left, he's coming to respect him as a person that he doesn't know. Like, I love this. I love this so much. He had already developed his own mental picture of Harold, probably in his mid-30s, a farmer maybe, tall and suntanned, skinny, not too bright in the book sense maybe, but plenty canny, which is like wrong in every single category, right? Like, like every single one of those things is the opposite of what Harold is. And so it's this really fascinating examination of, look, Harold, like, you have qualities that people would find valuable. If you weren't such a weird fucking creep, like, people would really like you. And it's like the struggle that as Harold cannot help but be the weird fucking creep. And it also makes you wonder, like, if Larry and Harold ever come in contact with each other, like, what the reaction is going to be there.
Well, I think the reaction is going to be, he's going to meet them and Stu's going to be there, and he's going to just hold out his hand to Stu and be like, "Harold, I assume."
Is Harold gonna love that? I bet Harold would love that. Yeah.
That felt like what we were setting up, because Stu is basically who you imagine when you see somebody doing all of this competent stuff.
Sure. No, I think that's fair. One thing I wanted to point out again while we're here is there is another beat, and it's one of several beats where the characters in this section looking at the sign that Harold has left all kind of comment on the fact that, man, he really went far out on that ledge in order to get that last little bit of the sign out there. he really risked his life, right? And I think it reinforces here that the part that was the most risky for him to paint on the side of the barn was Franny's name. And we didn't really talk about this much. I mean, you talked about it a little last week, but I just want to reinforce it here. I think this is so Harold, right? Like, why did he want to risk his life to do this message, specifically to get Franny's name on the message? Because she asked him to? Because she wanted him to? No. This was to prove something. This is like the classic nice guy thing of, I risked my life to add your name to the sign, Franny. So doesn't that mean you kind of owe me something now? Because, like, see this nice thing I did for you that you didn't ask me to do, but I did it anyway. And now that, because I was nice to you, now shouldn't you be nice to me? And by nice, I mean sex.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's definitely the kind of thing that is going on in Harold's dumb brain. Although, I do, like, I was only half joking. Like, I think he may literally think, like, we're dating. We had that picnic together. She gave me a kiss.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think it's not that I think you're wrong, but there's also the beats of, like, him being like, I love her. I know she doesn't love me, but I love her anyway. And so, like, how do you take those two disparate ideas? And I think very easily it's called self-deprecation, but also having this really warped sense of how the world works.
And lack of self-worth. I think there's some cognitive dissonance. There's some compartmentalization going on.
Sure.
I actually, setting aside how fun it is to make fun of Harold, I think he's an extremely fascinatingly drawn character.
Yeah.
He's one of those he's one of my favorite kinds of characters, which is a guy who sucks but has some redeeming qualities. And you watch the push and pull of the different parts that are in conflict with themselves.
Yeah. No, I love Harold as a character. I really do. I have no. Some people don't like these type of characters, and that's not me. I love these type of characters too. So I'm with you on that for sure. Yeah. So we see here that they get some motorcycles from the local bike shop and see more evidence of Harold and his resourcefulness. And then for some reason, Nadine is, like, really itching to leave to meet up with Harold and Stu and Franny, like really wanting to leave, like, right now, like right now. And her insistence on leaving right now ticks Larry off a little bit, to the point where he hurts her in a very similar way to the way he hurt Rita. Like, he grabs her a little bit too hard. He squeezes a little bit too hard, and he hurts her a little bit too much. But that's the old Larry. Larry's changed, right?
Yeah, well, he feels bad about it.
Well,
which,
yeah.
I think the thing here is Larry still makes mistakes, just like Nick makes mistakes. But what's good now is that Larry recognizes them as mistakes, and then he kind of tries to make amends, to do what's right.
And that's not the only mistake he's trying to rectify here, because in this moment, he decides to tell Nadine about Rita. And we saw a few pages earlier in the chapter where he basically says, Rita is done. It's behind me. It's buried. I'm never going to bring this up again. I'm never going to talk about this again to anyone. And he basically proves himself a liar here, where he in an attempt to make amends, explains what happened. And he tells the story of Rita truthfully, right? He doesn't take blame off himself for what happened to Rita. He says here, whatever she needed from me, friendship, understanding, help, I don't know. She wasn't getting enough. Her name was Rita Blakemore. I'd like to do better than by you. That's all. You and Joe. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, he still loses his temper with her. He gets angry. He hurts her. But he realizes his mistake. And not only does he realize his mistake, is he attempts to make amends for it by not pushing away the bad thing that happened before, but actually bringing it to the surface and talking about it and trying to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah. I think there's hope for our boy.
Mm-hmm. But is Nadine the right person to do this with? Because she's this super mystery, 2-color haired girl from Fairyland.
Yeah. No, so right. So the thing about her immediately wanting, like, I think for some reason she's like, we can't go west. I don't want to go west. That's a terrifying thought to me. Going west is something bad lays out west. I want to go to Vermont. I want to go the opposite direction. I want to go, and that, I think this is supported by her reaction when they realize they're going to have to go west.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, so we're moving into the dream section of the chapter, and this is always where it gets a little confusing, right? Because Larry dreams again later that night, and it's not of the Dark Man this time, but he dreams of the field of corn, and he in this dream, he has Nadine and Joe at his side. He's holding both of their hands as they approach the shack in the middle of the corn and meet Mother Abigail. This is the second character we've seen meet Mother Abigail. And we learn a little bit more from her, but like, I think it's really important that in this dream, they're by his side, right? Like, this is almost signs that the way he's handling these two people are maybe the path to what his salvation could eventually be, which is an interesting thought. But we learn here from Mother Abigail, she says, that black man, that servant of the devil, we got the Rockies between us and him, praise God, but they won't keep him back. That's why we got to knit together in Colorado. God come to me in a dream and showed me where, but we got to be quick as we can anyway. So you come see me. There's others coming too. So that's a little bit more. We got a little bit more of a plot there, right? We got to go to Colorado because of God. And that's where we're going to all meet up, I guess.
Yeah, I was a little first I've heard of Colorado, right? I thought it was like, oh, we're going to Nebraska, we're all gonna hole up in Nebraska. It's like, no, we're gonna maybe meet in Nebraska and then maybe head to Colorado. It's not really clear to me anyway.
Yeah. And again, there's this interesting confusion of how much Randall Flagg knows about what's happening, right? Because this idea that like we got the Rockies between us and him, but they won't keep him back, and like we've got to, I think one of the other things she says, we've got to hurry before he notices us or something. And yet like he's been in everyone's dreams and like people have felt his presence around. So how much of this is at his fingertips and how much of this is just general spookiness of the feeling, oncoming feelings of this great evil? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either.
So like you said, the Nadine we see in the dream here is incredibly resistant to the idea of going to Colorado. And Mother Abigail says to her, this could be a good man you got here, woman. He wants to make something out of himself. Why don't you cleave to him instead of using him? And she's like, no, we're going to Vermont. To your point, this is just dream Nadine, right? But it also seems to be allied with real Nadine, who we see is very, very insistent that they head up to Vermont as soon as possible.
See, I actually assumed that they were doing a kind of Dark Tower-esque like joint dream where this is psychic manifestation of Nadine, just like it's psychic manifestation of Mother Abigail.
It could be. We don't know that for sure. I mean, we know that Joe has dreams of Mother Abigail and of the Dark Man. We don't know if he had this exact same dream. We don't know. Right. Nadine will not tell us. So
yeah, that's the thing is Nadine, in my opinion, is pretending not to know what he's talking about, but this is totally her, and she totally witnessed this. That's my take.
Yeah. So I really love this part where after they wake up from the dream, we're learning a little bit more about Nadine. We learn that she was a school teacher, which kind of explains why she took Joe upon herself right away, why she feels that responsibility towards him. And then after that great conversation, Larry tries to put the moves on her, and she's like, no. Immediately, no. And Larry's really confused here because he's never been turned down before once in his life. But also because he knows, like, it's very clear to him. And I don't think like this is just Larry like completely misreading signals. I think she's giving off the "I'm into you" vibe, but she still won't do anything about it.
Yeah, mysteriouser and mysteriouser. It's like she's testing him, or like there's some criterion that she's looking for in him that he hasn't met or that he hasn't passed, and she's maybe waiting for some specific circumstance. There's always this ambivalence with her, right? It's like the same thing where she was following him but not actually coming up to meet him until her hand was forced. Yeah, and I think her hand's going to be forced again, actually.
Interesting. Okay. So into this awkward situation, we meet another woman. We meet Lucy Swan. Swan. So it's like she's a beautiful swan.
Okay.
To compare to the mysterious dark-haired Nadine.
I like that. Now, I mean, it's funny because the contrast that I drew was just like Lucy seems like such a normal person compared to all of the sort of fantastical strangeness that we've been.
Yeah, like Lucy is like exasperated and like have been through the fucking ringer and is just like super happy to see people, which is so contrasted with Nadine's like just presence, which is just like this overbearing. I love that you said fairy. I think that's really perfect because it's just like she's got this presence and like she barely feels like a human being at times. It's really really interesting.
Yeah, and then Lucy in contrast feels very grounded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the introduction of Lucy to our team, you know, as we said, brings it up to 4, which I think the first time we've seen 4 characters gathered together in this book so far. But one thing it allows us to do is have characters finally like realize that, hey, we're all having the same dreams, which is weird that we're doing that. That seems to mean something. We don't really get our characters to like react to that idea quite yet. They just kind of like, wow, that's weird. It's weird. Like they start kind of comparing notes on the dreams. And this is the moment that you were talking about where we see that Nadine is kind of saying, no, she hasn't had any of these dreams. She doesn't know what you're talking about. And Larry immediately knows she's lying, which again, is just laying on our mystery. Again, beat after beat after beat of like, what is going on with this woman? And we're not going to figure it out this week.
Maybe next week. We'll see.
Maybe next week. So they decide to take Lucy Swan with them and head on up to the Stovington Plague Center. And that's where our chapter ends, where they get to the Stovington Plague Center and see what we already knew. Everyone there is dead, and our characters have decided to head to Nebraska. And so the 4 characters we see here, as we said, like we knew the 3 of them were together, but it's also signed Glenn Bateman. So obviously Glenn got back together with Stu, as he kind of hinted he would. If he came by, he would go with him this time. So that's where we leave the chapter.
Which is funny because Glenn gave this impression of being somebody who just I don't need people, and then it's like bullshit, Glenn. I know you're full of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Glenn, fuck you, buddy. Fucking pessimist. We don't need that around here, man. We got to rebuild society.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
And so that is where our chapter ends for the week, Matt. We have our group of 4 heading behind Stu and Franny and Harold and Glenn, who hopefully we'll get to hang out with next week and see what they've been up to.
Yeah, can't wait to see.
All right. As we said, next week we will be doing 2 more chapters, chapter 45 and 46, another 2 long pair of chapters, so we'll only be doing those 2. And I don't know. I mean, I know what the chapters are about, Matt, but I can't tell you anything because that's the format of the show. So I can't do that.
It's kind of the thing we're doing here, huh?
Yeah. So sorry about that. You'll have to wait to read them tomorrow, I guess.
Okay. Well, all right.
All right. Before we go, though, we have to do our discussion question. Our discussion question for last week was, what is your favorite chapter 38? Which really means, what was your favorite like series of world building vignettes that are beautifully crafted and written by Stephen King specifically. I think I made a mistake here, Matt, asking a bunch of King nerds what their favorite version of this particular thing is. It's like, here's what I did. I said, this is the best version of this thing I've ever seen. Hey, listeners out there who also really love this author, what is your favorite version of this thing? Because a lot of people just responded, Scott, it's this one.
Yeah, this is the one.
It's exactly
I agree
this.
with you.
Yeah. So my bad, but I think we still got a lot of really interesting answers outside of this particular chapter.
Yeah, no, we got some really interesting and creative ones actually. Speaking of which, from Richard G, my favorite use of these vignettes is No Country for Old Men. Sheriff Bell reflects on why there is no country for old men. It is perfectly used for giving weight to the situation, and as everything builds, you're reminded about these horrifying stories that makes everything feel so much more real. Without these reflections, the story could seem far-fetched, but within it pushes your mind to stray and feel like this stuff is happening every day. Also, probably my favorite adaptation to film ever, behind, obviously, The Dark Tower. What a masterpiece. That's great.
I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah, it's interesting because the titular reference only briefly shows up in the movie, but I guess the impression I'm getting from this is that it's a bit more central to the novel. I haven't actually read the
I
novel.
have not read No Country for Old Men either, but I think that's my understanding of it is that is very true. So I need to read that.
Yeah.
Book.
I definitely need long recuperative breaks between Cormac McCarthy novels, though.
That is fair. That's fair. Next, we have Tashel Sopel, who says, this discussion question has made me realize how much I love the Chapter 38 style. I immediately thought of my favorite books outside of King's work, Scott Lynch's Gentleman Bastard series. Lynch's vignettes are a lesson in exquisite world building, and I think he uses the technique as seamlessly as the master himself. It's a little long, but I've included an excerpt from one of my favorite vignettes. It's a peek into the soul of the people of Camor, and it's always made me smile. We won't read that whole vignette, because we're already going long, but check it out on that's a Reddit answer, right, Matt?
Yeah. Also, it's impossible to read Gentleman Bastards quotes because of all the names and how hard they are to pronounce. But
yeah, people already yell at me about how I pronounce things, so I'm not even going to try to do that. But we love those books.
Yeah, we've covered 2 of them on the Doof Book Club.
Incorrect.
Did we not cover the second one?
We've covered all 3.
Oh, we've covered 3 of them. Holy
we've
shit.
done them all. Yeah.
We really like them. By the way, you can go to youtube.com/doofmedia. That works.
Oh, you can?
I tried it a minute ago.
Well, look at me. I'm a fucking liar.
And
so go there.
Yeah. Or yeah, etc.
Wow.
Anyway.
I just checked it because I refused to believe you, but you're right.
Yeah. I didn't actually know that it would work. I just figured I'd try. Rear Admiral Bottom says the best Chapter 38 is the Rakakuni expanded multiverse. Which I guess
should we explain where that comes from?
Yeah, let's just say it's a reference to the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, which came out recently.
It's the best movie of the year, and you should see it.
It's the best movie of the year. Everybody who gets the reference thinks this is great.
Mm-hmm. Steve Living Room says, I can't think of a better Chapter 38 than The Stands. It's just perfectly real and hits hard. So I think, Steve, we used Steve you as like the example of everyone who said The Stand is the answer.
Yes, we are all Steve today. Leland Gaunt says, my favorite Chapter 38 is the escalating situation toward the end of Needful Things, as pretty much anybody in the town goes batshit crazy. King breaks the fourth wall, talking directly to the reader, pretty much exactly as he does in the Battle of Alguciento. As he starts switching between viewpoints and the people involved, the passages and even sentences get ever shorter, creating a faster pace and even more tension before everything goes up in flames. It's so good. I read that book more than 10 times, and it's still one of my all-time favorites. Boom, correct answer. Believe me, Mr. Gaunt knows best. It's very fun that your username is Leland Gaunt and you did this answer.
I feel like this is just Leland Gaunt, and he wanted to throw us off his trail, so he changed the D to a T. It was like, we'll never know.
Yeah.
So my favorite of this version is this great book about me and how awesome I am.
And this time that I fucked up this town.
Jiraxis, the Eridar Lord, says, my favorite Chapter 38 comes from The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie. It's a chapter that covers a battle starting with a new character who gets some backstory and quickly dies. Afterwards, the perspective shifts to the man who killed him, and we learn how that person ended up in this battle until he dies, and the perspective shifts to his killer. This continues for a while with accidentally friendly fire, wild violence, and general chaos. All this does a great job of showing the absolute insanity and despair of battle.
So it's like an FPS game where you go into the POV of the person who killed you.
Yeah. That's great. I think a Joe Abercrombie book is on our poll right now for next month's book club. And I believe it's winning. So that's the other thing. We talked about the book club at the beginning of the show, but we didn't talk about the fact that our patrons get to pick what the book is. So we get people to send us in nominations, and we put 5 of them up for a poll every month, and our patrons vote. So if you are a patron and you didn't know that, you can go to our Patreon right now and vote on what book you want us to do next month. Yeah, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie is currently in the lead on this poll.
Yeah, well, go jump over there and vote to make sure it stays in the lead if that's your bag.
Yeah, I've never read a Joe Abercrombie book, and I've always been curious to, so I kind of hope it does win.
Yeah, me too. All right, Garlips says, the discussion question made me think of the great movie called Pontypool. I won't say much, but the book it is based on, I won't say much about it or the book it is based on because it really needs to be experienced. But there's a section in the middle where we get a string of obituaries delivered like vignettes as a chaotic influence on the townspeople causes them to become, amongst other things, homicidal. It reads much like John Waters, 51, died with his head in the family's oven and was survived for 2 minutes by his wife Jan, 50, who then proceeded to light herself on fire and run into a gas station forecourt. Just this really bizarre and disastrous chain of people being offed, but delivered on radio by host Grant Massey. Seriously, watch Pontypool. It's incredible. Cool. I've never heard of it at all.
Me neither. I was looking this up while you were talking.
Yeah, no idea what this is. So very curious.
Yeah, interesting. At a box office of $32,000. So this is a very small horror film. Check it out.
Cool.
Next up, we have Like a Fox, who says, while I'm particularly fond of the dead chain letter chapter from earlier in the stand, it reminded me all too much of having to do contact tracing earlier this year when my household got COVID. I feel the need to shout out a story that y'all finally got me to read for the first time earlier this year. And by that, I mean that my favorite series of vignettes I've read is Dr. Yamada Saves the World, or the series of therapy sessions in Dr. Jessica Yamada's interlude in the hit web serial Worm by Wildbow. So much characterization and world building in such a short amount of time. Truly a masterstroke. That's great. We were just talking with our podcasting partners last week about how we get some King fans to go check out Worm and Wildbow, and they let us know how much they enjoyed it, and that makes me really happy. So I'm glad you tried that story out and you enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, that makes me smile. That is a good example. That's that chapter in particular is the most chapter 38 of any of the Wildbow chapters that I can think of, because it is indeed a sequence of these interlude vignettes.
I never put that connection together, but it does not surprise me at all now why I said when we were reading that book, I love this chapter. It's one of my favorite chapters of the book so far. So that it's all coming together in my head now. It's great. That's wonderful.
That's very cool. All right, cool. Second to last answer. Tea and Hypocrisy says, question was good food for thought. I might have a slightly different take on it than other people, but this is the example that keeps tugging on my mind sleeve. I like that. And so I'm going with it. My chapter 38 turns out to be the lyrics of a song. When I first heard King of Pain by the Police many years ago, I was taken with the drum heavy rhythm and slightly upbeat melody. Then I started to pay attention to the words and remember being completely gutted at their bleak yet beautiful and evocative nature. They had a rapid fire snapshot vignette quality which conveyed heartbreaking stories with very few words. They say it wasn't just a salmon, but a dead salmon frozen in a waterfall. It wasn't only a fossil, but a fossil trapped in a high cliff wall. Not a bird, but rather a black-winged gull with a broken back. And they go on. It's a great song. I love the Police. I love Sting. Mm-hmm. All these brief descriptions succeed in creating a complete picture and mood that's my soul out there in a way that is more in-depth story with a singular focus just could not. I love. That's the thing about Sting as a lyricist is he does create these extremely evocative like stories. He actually writes most of his songs as narrative. Like they not just poetry but also narrative and definitely imagery. Very, very heavy on the imagery.
Those are my favorite kind of lyrics. Would you believe I'm the type of person who really likes narrative, and so narrative in songs is my favorite.
Yeah, I really like Sting personally.
Me too. Yeah. All right, our final answer comes from Gerardo, who says the ultimate not advancing the plot moment for us from the 9-season series of Seinfeld, the self-proclaimed show about nothing. The characters stay true to form, immature from beginning to end. That's not a take I would have. I mean, obviously that's true, but that's not an answer I would have gone with. But it works. The whole show is just a series of vignettes about these characters that do nothing and learn nothing and accomplish nothing.
That's great. That's very fun.
All right, thank you so much for all those answers, everyone. Just a reminder that we have kind of instituted a new policy where if we ever get more than 10 answers, to keep our episode times as low as we possibly can, we're doing just a random number generator and pulling answers randomly. So again, if we didn't pick your answer this week, it's not because we didn't like it. It's we've put the control in the computer. So we're not picking them. The computer is picking them.
That's right.
And speaking of answers that you need to answer, I hope we get more than 10 responses to this one, because I think it's a really good question that Matt came up with. And Matt, since you came up with it, I'm going to let you deliver it to the people.
So this week's question is, what is your favorite moral test of a character?
So these are the moments in the story where the story has created the situation in which the character needs to make a choice or a decision, and what they decide will determine what we think of that character. We had a few examples of that this week, right?
Right. That is the inspiration, is our characters being confronted with challenges, and how they react to it tells us a lot about who they are.
Yeah. Challenges and Julies.
Yep.
If we named our episodes, that would be the name of this week's episode: Challenges and Julies.
That's great.
All right, that is it for us here on Kingslingers. As we said, we will continue the stand next week with chapters 45 and 46. I can't believe it, Matt, but I'm looking at my book right now, and we are getting dangerously close to halfway through this novel somehow already. I can't believe it. It's going by so fast, but it's been great, and so we're gonna continue with 2 more chapters and 70 more pages next week.
That's unbelievable. It doesn't feel like we've been at it for that long, but that's very cool. All right. Yeah. Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, or over on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, as we mentioned before, the subreddit at r/doofmedia is a great place to answer the questions, or just hang out, or to check out the playlist that we mentioned earlier of the songs from the beach party, or to look at the other thread where folks post the differences between the initial novel and the updated novel.
Yeah.
Just a lot of stuff happening over there.
Yeah. And of course, you can always go to Doof Media, or to youtube.com/Doof Media. We learned that is a place where you can go. You can just type that into your browser and it'll take you right there.
That's the power of the internet.
Subscribe. So, like and subscribe. I'm not going to go through the whole spiel about how I say, if you're not always subscribed, please subscribe, blah, 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 blah. Just do it.
Yeah. Good advice, Scott. And if you like our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon via patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons Scott K, Glenn G, Joey M, Shannon P, Athron, and Joshua. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the stuff we have over there on the Patreon. We do put time into it, and we hope that you guys have fun.
Yeah, don't forget to check out our Other Levels of the Tower episode talking about Cell, the best movie ever.
Uh-huh. That was one that we talked about.
And next month we will be doing oh fuck, I forgot. I had it on the tip of my tongue. Silver Bullet we're doing next month. Yeah. All right. Of course, if you cannot afford to support us right now, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out in many different ways, including sharing this podcast with all your Stephen King loving friends. We actually just got an email from a listener last week, said that they did share the podcast with a bunch of their friends, and they're listening now. So job well done. Well, thank you so much for doing that. And of course, you can always help us out by leaving us a rating and a review on whatever podcasting platform you listen to. This week's Spotlight review comes from Jimmy T on Apple Podcasts, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Love your show. You two do a wonderful job of breaking down how my favorite author writes. Your insight has helped me to better understand him in so many ways. Glad to be caught up and able to be part of the discussion. Keep doing what you do." Well, thank you so much, Jimmy. We really appreciate that. And we're going to keep going for at least 10 more weeks, because we've got a lot of the stand left to do.
All right. Sounds great.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jimmy. Thank you, everyone who is leaving these ratings and reviews. They keep coming in every week, and we keep being so appreciative of them. They really mean a lot to us. Thank you. All right, folks, that is it for us this week. We will be back next week with more stand, with more characters. Are we going to see our characters we saw this week, or are we going to see all new ones? We just don't know, but we're going to find out next week. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.